Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the October meeting of the Transportation Policy Leadership Group. As you can tell by your agenda today, is a very pointed one. And we're very pleased to have today Mr. Paul Simon, who is the FDOT Secretary. We've met with he and his staff in preparation for the meeting, and we've asked him to prepare some opening comments, but it is intended to be a conversation, so it's not a presentation. It's just he'll talk, and whenever you want to ask questions of him, please do. But we want to thoroughly understand where FDOT's strategy is with regard to Hillsborough County. So that's our purpose for our meeting today. So, Mr. Simon.
Thank you. Certainly a pleasure to be here, and this is definitely a conversation. I do have a presentation, but that's more just to kind of make sure I hit all the major points, and not, if we wander, that's absolutely fine. I thought today was, let's see if I know how to work this thing. There we go. Is to touch on three global items. I'll give you the Florida DOT vision for what we're trying to accomplish as a department. Oh, sorry, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Let me remind all of you, microphone right in front of you when you speak. So.
We'll talk a little bit about how Florida DOT plans on implementing this vision. And as all good things happen, there's plenty of challenges that is going to test our mettle a little bit, and we'll definitely quickly go through a few of those challenges that we're going to have upcoming in the future to how we're going to get this, make this vision happen. So, basically, the vision for our department at this moment in time is to try to make sure that we incorporate and find ways to have transportation help drive the economy of the state of Florida. And when I say that, we're really looking for trying to, everyone seems to think we have a huge budget, which I guess it's large, but we have a large number of needs in the state. And when you start looking at the number of people that are moving into the state of Florida, we're quickly going to become the third largest state in the country. There's plenty of pressure on our transportation system across the state, whether you want to talk about moving people, goods, or services. So what we're talking about is the fact that it's definitely going to take a partnership of the federal, state, and local governments, and we're going to need to make sure that everybody understands how they fit into this role, and making sure that we have a true regional perspective of what transportation is about. And the biggest thing that if you want your economy to grow, especially as we continue to have more people come into the state who need jobs, obviously that means we're going to need more business to come into the state. Businesses need what we call system reliability. They need to know that they can get their goods, services, and products to market in a timely manner. Transportation ends up being one of the, if any of you folks are business folks, you know this, but that's one of their largest costs in what they do, is trying to get that product or service to market timely so that they can serve their customers' needs. And once again, if you guys have any questions, please jump in at any point in time. So you're probably wondering, how is this any different than what Florida DOT has done in the past? Well, when you basically, the biggest thing we like to highlight right now is if you start looking at Florida is really what we call a consumer state. We consume far more goods and services than we actually produce. And that trade differential roughly it's about a 60-40 split. 40% of the raw materials and goods we export come in and out of our various ports. And when I say ports, it's more than water. It could be air, rail, seaports. So that means 60% of that of the goods and services that we're consuming come in other places, whether it be Savannah, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and as far as Long Beach, and either get trucked or railed in to Florida for our economy to basically survive. What we're looking at trying to do is find ways to improve those numbers. One of the major pieces of that's going to be the Panama Canal expansion. That's expected to be done in 2015. Here in the Tampa Bay area, I don't think people really fully understand the jewel that we have in the Port of Tampa. 3,000-acre facility that has quite a bit of room for additional expansion of goods and services. The department itself is working with the port right now to help them get into what we call the container business. Port of Tampa right now is largely a bulk facility, whether it be the phosphates, oil, those type of things, that orange juice that comes in and out. So the port wants to focus on the container business, and why is that important? That's a large focus for what comes out of both Central America and the Far East is container-style traffic. A lot of what we get today in the container mode comes from Savannah. It comes from Philadelphia and Baltimore and gets shipped all the way up, basically the Atlantic, put on a truck or a train, and then brought back to Florida. Doesn't make a lot of sense for that. Far more costly. It's going to be more effective for our state and our people, more cost effective for our state and our people if we can start promoting our ports. And not just the water side, we have the air side as well. Most people don't realize that Miami is a huge airport from the standpoint of perishable goods. Almost 60% of the flowers, the fresh flowers that our country uses on the east side of the country comes through Miami. And if you've ever been to Miami or Fort Lauderdale, those areas, beautiful areas, not trying to show any disrespect to those areas, but the Everglades are definitely a boundary for them right now. They're very packed. The one nice thing that Tampa has that I've definitely been trying to sell since I've been here is the fact that we have quite a bit of room to grow. And if the port, whether it be TIA or whether it be the Port of Tampa, if we get into that container business, the one thing that's going to really restrict their ability to sell the concept is going to be that if we bring all these containers in, there has to be something to put in those containers to ship them back out. No one likes to ship an empty container. That's what we call a dead haul, and it really doesn't do a lot for the business side of what's going on. So we need to figure out ways to help do that. We look at the concept that from a transportation perspective, we like to cluster like businesses together, because that means that the infrastructure most businesses need that are of a like cluster are of similar types and capacities. Obviously, if you have more of a tourist-generated style business, that's going to be one type of transportation facility. If you have manufacturing, that's going to be the larger style vehicles, so that's going to be a different type of transportation facility. So we want to work with our communities to help cluster businesses together. We also have what we call changing expectations of our customers. I talked about system reliability earlier. That's critical in everything that we do, but there's also change in what we call is driving patterns. I like to use my son as the prime example of that. 22-year-old kid. And I always like to ask him these type of questions because basically he is the user that we're really trying to target. Like I always tell him, I said, by the time I get half the stuff built that we've got in the plan, I'm going to be an old man and I'm not really going to care. And you're going to be the person that's going to have to use it. So what is it that you want? And he's very eloquent in how he words it to me. He says, Dad, he goes, it's like this. He goes, and by the way, he's a computer engineer, so you just need to understand what he does. He says, I get up in the morning, I walk into my spare bedroom, that's my office. He goes, if I don't go to the store, and if any of you are retailers, I'm sorry for my son right now. He goes, I don't go to the store. He goes, I get on my computer, I order it, and Amazon brings it to my front door. And he says, and when I go out with my friends at night, he goes, if I want a little nightlife, I certainly don't want to get busted by some cop because I've been out partaking in items. So he goes, I'd be looking for some type of system that can get me there, it's safe, it's efficient, that works in my type of time frame. And so when you start thinking about that, why is all that important? Well, that's how we have to start looking at the changes of how transportation is going to be viewed. And that changes how we do land use planning, that changes our traffic patterns, that changes just everything that you can talk about with respect to the millennial generation would rather play on their phone than drive a vehicle. The other great example of my son is he was 17 and he hadn't taken driver's ed yet. I'm like going, dude, come on. Dad's getting sick of chauffeuring. You got to go take this driver's ed class so you can start driving yourself to hockey and all the stuff that he was doing. It's just a complete different mindset than when I grew up, or when some of you folks probably grew up. So we need to be thinking about that and how that affects where transportation is going. And that's where I talk about transportation needs to be really a regional system. I realize that we're sitting in Hillsborough County, but I'll use another family member as an example, and that's my wife. She doesn't really care who owns the road or what the problem is, she likes to be able to count on the fact that it's about 2 miles a minute, or I'm sorry, a mile every 2 minutes. She'd be speeding otherwise, and then you guys would be sending cops after her. And I say that is, and we're the typical right brain, left brain family. She's an English major, and I'm an engineer. She doesn't really care what my excuses are for why traffic is held up, or that I got construction, or whatever it is. She wants that system reliability. And quite frankly, that's our user. That's why I describe these things. They don't really care what our problems are. They don't care whether it's a state road. They don't care if it's a county road or a city street. They have expectations that we are going to provide them a system for the taxpayers' dollars that they're providing us. So we need to start really thinking about how we're going to partner together better, and also think about the fact that our businesses aren't just competing with the folks in Polk or Lauderdale or Miami. They're competing with Atlanta, Charlotte, Austin, quite frankly, Japan, Taiwan, Central America. Our businesses compete internationally anymore, and we need to find ways to make sure that there's smooth modal connections so that all these things happen. So it's not just going from your house to your doctor's appointment, but it's how does that cotton get from America down to the South American countries, become a finished product, come back and actually hit the Walmart, the Publix, or whatever it is, wherever you're buying that particular product. It's true what I call logistics. Transportation is no longer about roadsides and pavements, and granted, we have to have that right, but it's truly about logistics anymore. So then there's what I also call mobility options. Depending on what you're trying to do, we need to start thinking about what those options are. So we're definitely going to get into the conversation of technology here a little bit later, so I'm not going to talk about that immediately, but that's going to play a role in what type of mobility options that we all should be considering, and we need to understand we can't afford everything, so we need to start deciding what it is that we want to do and what we want to be. And it also affects system design. Depending, as I mentioned earlier, depending on what you're designing for, will depend on what the system looks like. So we all got to work together, whether it be on the government side, whether it's the federal, state, or local folks, or quite frankly anymore, transportation in the old transportation model where the government funds it and then the private sector builds it and then we maintain and operate it. That's changing every day. The big I-275 project outside our door here, that's what the department calls a public-private partnership. It's a design build, and we have the private sector definitely part of this process, not only from how it's designed and taking some of their ideas, but in some cases on some projects, we'll flip to a different one, which is the I-4 connector. They've got money in the game. So they're definitely expecting a rate of return on that. Don't think that the private sector comes into this and just hands over their cash. All these things have to be considered in the new model. And then we have a completely different private sector model going on right now with an unsolicited bid up in Pasco County on State Highway 5456, where we have a international firm that wants to come in and build managed lanes basically from US 19 to 301. I can't talk too much about that particular project right now because we're in what we call the cone of silence, because due to state code I have to advertise it and see if anyone else has any thoughts or anybody else wants to get into this concept, and that's where I'm at. But just realize that the whole world is changing with how transportation is designed, funded, and maintained and operated. Another great example that I can talk a little bit more about is the All Aboard Florida, which is over on the southeast side, where Florida East Coast Rail is basically leasing the state track from us, and they're going to do a high-speed rail from Miami and take the turn and go up into Orlando. The department has no money into that. Matter of fact, we will be receiving money out of that deal from the fact that we're leasing the tracks. But that's a whole different private sector model that they feel it can that can definitely bring dollars. They feel they can make a profit on it, and that could be a big game changer for how transportation moves in Florida. If we can have more of these type of concepts, it definitely eases the strain on the tax base and the tax burden, and it goes to a true user-based model. I can stop real quickly and ask if there's any questions, because I'm throwing a lot of different concepts and thoughts out here really fast, and I just want to make sure if anyone's got any thoughts or questions they can ask along the way. Okay.
Go ahead. This is not a shy group once they are ready to ask.
Okay, that's good. I talked about this earlier, but we really need to decide what a regional transportation system looks like. And everybody needs to understand their role. And when I say that, most people ask me, what are you talking about, Paul? And I try to describe it as simply as I can. The state's probably going to be, has to be looked at more as the organization that does the major spine. The counties will be more the arteries, and then the locals will be more the capillaries, if you want to use a concept of how your body works. There is just no way that the state of Florida can be all things to all people. There's no way that the federal government can be all things to all people. We're watching their abilities right now, which is causing heartache on other sides. But the reality of it is, we need to all understand where we fit into this process, and we need to start deciding what our system needs to look like together. And we all need to come to the table with the parts that we're responsible for. There's just no other way to look at this really in any other way or expectation.
Hey, Paul, have you all defined what the spine looks like, or what that is going to consist of?
We did for example, specifically in the Tampa Bay area, we did the I-275 study. And we also we're rapidly winding down on the managed lanes study that we're looking at. And we have some ideas, but we're still always open for more conversation on that. Ours focuses on things like we have a port, we're working with the port to create the port study. TIA did a master plan on the airport. We're working regularly with CSX about the rail component. And like I say, we have, as a department, we have a highway component on the big side of it. But when it comes to business and when you're trying to attract business, one of the things I've learned very quickly in this process is you can have the primary chunk where you have pretty good system reliability, but the moment they exit, if that last 4 miles is a pain for them, and i.e. out of the port of Tampa, having to drive to Ybor City, one of the biggest things that the department heard long before I was here, I can't take credit for this, but long before I was here, there was a definite concern about the concept of taking those big trucks and rumbling through Ybor City. Not only did Ybor City not appreciate all those trucks rumbling through, but basically shipper said that's just not a very efficient way for us to move. That first chunk was a detriment for them. The I-4 connector, which should open up to traffic, it won't be completed 100%, but should open up to traffic at the end of the year. That is the biggest thing that the port can sell right now, is that you literally can leave the port property and never see a stop signal until you get to the location that you're driving to. And that's been a huge selling point for those folks. Love to take credit for it, can't. But it's those type of things that you need to think about. It's the full, from doorstep to doorstep system, and whether it be freight, whether it be people, whether it be if you're a service-related industry, what does that look like, and how do we do that efficiently and effectively, and put Tampa on the map as being a place people want to come. So how are we going to implement the vision? Got a little bit behind on my slides here, 1 second. We talked a little bit earlier about the fact that traditional government funding which has been the backbone for many years, is definitely struggling. The gas tax, when you look at the fact that cars are becoming more fuel efficient, driver patterns are changing, as I talked about earlier, that's not really what we call a sustainable funding source long term. I personally believe that we will be looking at more of a user-based type funding source in the end. I do know that Florida Transportation Commission 2 months back held a workshop exactly on that, and was looking at what does a user-based system look like. And they brought folks in from Oregon and all that to discuss some of the places across the country that have been looking at pilots. I'm not saying that the Transportation Commission has decided anything, so I want to caution people about that, but they're definitely looking at those concepts. Mentioned also earlier that public-private partnerships is definitely going to be a way that we're going to be looking at trying to make the money go further. I'm not saying that from a governmental side that we're walking away from our obligation, but there doesn't seem to be an appetite anywhere in the country right now to raise taxes. So with the fact that things are getting more expensive, the miles that are being driven while they're holding fairly steady, they're not gaining, they're not losing ground right now. As the economy has improved, the gas mileage definitely has improved, which reduces the dollar volume coming in to fund these style projects. That's definitely going to be something that's going to stress our system. There's different contracting methods, and what I like to tell people is we need to start moving at what I call moving at the speed of business, to borrow UPS's phrase. We need to start thinking about how we can deliver our products more timely. When a business comes in, they can't wait 7 years for me to go through the process of going through all these studies and getting all the approvals and this, that, and the other. That's why we really start talking about the concept of business clustering, because if you understand where you're putting your businesses, understanding what your current transportation system has, and what it's going to take to prepare it for these clusters, you can have it prepared in when they show up, it's already ready to go, or it's already in the pipeline, well down the path. And then, quite frankly, using some of the other funding sources that we have from the private side, we might be able to produce these projects and should be able to produce them much more quickly. And quite frankly, the last piece of it is the private finance piece with things like All Aboard Florida or this potential unsolicited proposal up in Pasco. Those are all things that basically they're not waiting for government to solve it. If it's profitable, business will find ways to solve it themselves. Now we're getting into what we call modal choices. The other big thing that we're hearing from our customers as we go around in any public meeting is that people want choice. And this is why the department is switched gears a little bit and gone to this whole managed lane or express lane concept, because it provides people, at least from a highway side, a choice. You'll still have the general purpose lanes if you want to use the general purpose lanes, and if traffic is backed up, if time isn't of the essence for you, that gives you an option. If time is of the essence for you and you want to pay the premium to drive on a tolled managed lane, for example, that would be something that would provide you that opportunity. We can also look at premium transit options from things such as bus rapid transit and be able to move larger volumes of people the same way. And it's definitely something the department is looking at as we look at these managed lanes concepts across, specifically for us, the Tampa Bay area. I mentioned modal connections. It's not just about people, it's about moving freight. The smoother the modal connection, the more attractive it is to those companies. So we've been working very diligently, as I mentioned, with the Port of Tampa, TIA, CSX. Anybody that wants to talk modal connections, we're happy to talk about freight and how we can improve the system. So those are all things that it's all about providing customers choice, providing them the opportunity to pick. Usually when people ask me about managed lanes, a lot of people like calling them Lexus lanes, because they think that only people who are well-to-do will use them. What we're finding in most of our studies across the country is that managed lanes are actually the more desired choice for actually families. And a prime example I always like to give is, and I remember these days very clearly, if you have a kid in daycare, if you're supposed to pick your kid up at 5 o'clock, they would charge me an extra, $25 for every 15 minutes I was late. Now, if I know that I could get on a managed lane, spend $1.50, and save $25, my rate of return is looking pretty solid. Plus, that's one less thing my wife has to complain to me about. I remember those days very clearly. So, because I was always late. So those are the type of things that we need to start thinking about in realizing that providing our community choices is a very big aspect of where a lot of these things are going. and there's different ways to do it. You can move people individually, and you can move people in large quantities by partnering with people like Hart or in Pinellas, PSTA, and the like. A lot of folks have wanted to know what the managed lanes map look like. Realize this is very draft. We are still studying this, but I thought I could throw it up there and kind of let you guys see what where the department is looking at. There is no way we can build these all at once, so you need to realize this would be done in a phased approach. We would be looking at basically the piece in Pinellas, the Howard Franklin, and the piece through downtown. From West Shore to downtown, that would be the first major chunks that we would try to take a look at. All these things would be are definitely a piece of where we're going. As we talk about the Howard Franklin, we did our first public meeting, or our most recent public meeting, I should say first, yesterday in Pinellas, and we have the Hillsborough County public meeting at the Marriott tomorrow afternoon, evening. So, but the Howard Franklin will definitely be a major piece to that puzzle if we decide to go express lanes. Bold, innovative technology mindset. And what I'm trying to say here is that I do believe technology is coming a lot faster than most people realize, and it's going to have a dramatic change in how we do business. This is probably the biggest technology and what it's going to do to transportation. This is probably the biggest thing since the advent in the 50s of the concept of going to interstates. The autonomous vehicle, a lot of folks are sitting there thinking that that's the Jetsons, and we're way too far away from that. I will tell you that in my previous life experience, I was with the Michigan DOT. We've been working with the auto industry for over 15 years on autonomous vehicles, and I do know that there is in the auto industry will tell you, there's an honest-to-God race between Nissan, Mercedes, and General Motors on who's going to have the first fully autonomous vehicle on the production autonomous vehicle on the road ready by 2020. And they aren't kidding. From the Florida standpoint, with respect to autonomous vehicles, we are holding our first Florida Autonomous Vehicle Summit, November 14th and 15th, at the Convention Center. We do have Google, with their Google vehicle, committed to bring their vehicle out to the port. We'll have a test track set up for anybody who wants to see what it's like to sit in a fully autonomous vehicle. So I would put that plug in if you're interested in autonomous vehicles. That's definitely something to consider. How vehicles are move and what's going to power those vehicles in the future is definitely changing between the hybrids and the electrics out there. I fully believe that that's, as I was talking earlier, the gas tax is not what we can call a long-term sustainable funding source, and we believe that is in part to the fact that we think that how the propulsion is going to happen is going to change and change dramatically. GPS is playing a huge role in where we're going for the autonomous vehicle. There's also what we call vehicle-to-vehicle technology and vehicle-to-infrastructure technology. A lot of people are concerned that if we go to autonomous vehicles that the crash rates are going to increase, this, that, and the other. There will definitely have to be multiple systems out there, and that's what a lot of these different systems all talk about. There's what we call smart roads. In the bottom left-hand corner of that picture, that's what is a truly solar-powered roadway right there. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, Paul, where did you come up with this crazy idea? I was actually working with some folks out in Idaho, an electrical engineer. They currently have a Federal Highway Administration grant to continue to pursue this. That roadway that you see there, right there, that he had on a piece of property, there's no such things as painted road lines. It heats itself in the winter, so if you have snow, it'll melt the snow. He's even got it set up, his little test strip, sort of like you can take your cell phone and set it on those pads and it charges the pad. He had a way to figure out how he could actually charge electric vehicles right off the cellular grid. The biggest issues he has with that right now is what we call load transfer at the joints. Those are 12 by 12 panels. And if you rode across that roadway, especially at any type of speed, you'd probably be, your teeth would chatter because he doesn't have how those panels and how they connect correct. And his other big thing is to get the surface so that it keeps a level of coefficient of friction try not to talk too much engineering, but it needs some friction on there. He can get a decent friction on it, but then he can't get the electrical generation out of the surface. So we've been working with those folks, at least when I was out in Idaho, to get a federal highway grant, which he got, to try to get electric roads so that you can have solar power roadways. It would solve a lot of things. Clean energy, when I talk about green energy, think of the number of miles of roadway we have out there if it was all solar powered, from the standpoint of it produces more energy than it uses. So it's a completely off the wall concept, but I think it's not as far away as people think it is. And then there's other forms of transportation. I've been mostly focusing on highway, but I know it's very controversial, and we'll talk about some of those in the challenges section, but drones and we call them unmanned aerials. There's a lot of technology in the flight arena, in the port arena, and even in the rail arena that really can transform how transportation moves forward. And I could talk about these subjects forever, so I'm going to get off of it before I go off on an engineering tangent on you.
Before you do, let me ask you a question. If this group is going to be faced with trying to make decisions about where to make transportation investments, obviously both near term and longer term. I'd like you to talk about how can they factor in technology so that they're not making investments that ultimately prove to be less valuable simply because technology overtook new technological solutions developed.
Well, we're actually struggling with that in the department right now,
Okay.
and that's the whole purpose of the Autonomous Vehicle Conference.
Okay.
It's not going to focus as much on the technology side because Detroit is light years ahead of Detroit and California are the two leaders in that area. What Florida has decided to focus on is how do you implement the use of this technology, and how do you make wise financial decisions, and what type of laws do we need in place? How does that affect things like the insurance industry? I'm getting into some of my challenges right now, but I'll touch on it since you asked. How do you implement this, and how do you prepare the infrastructure for the future? Because as I mentioned, part of it is vehicle to infrastructure technology, which means the infrastructure has components in it that those vehicles are going to need to talk to. We're struggling with that right now in the department on the Howard Franklin. It's a 75-year structure that we're proposing to build. How do I prepare the Howard Franklin when we build that to accept technology in the future that I'm not even 100% sure what it is yet?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the bridge is going to be there. We're going to need it. I don't worry about that particular piece of it. But the last thing I want to do is look at you folks and say, we spent $400 million to put the Howard Franklin, the northbound span of the Howard Franklin up, and then 10 years later come at you and say, hey, just kidding, now I need another $100 million to prep it for the technology pieces that we want to put in it. Wouldn't be a very wise use of the taxpayers' dollars. We get that, and we're struggling with that ourselves. I don't think there's a clear answer, but we definitely want as many brains in the room as we can get at that conference to try to understand what you folks are seeing. We can explain what we're seeing. We're going to have some experts from across the country coming to talk to us about exactly how to maneuver these type of things, and that's exactly what that conference is about. So I was really excited when I was able to get the department to buy into this concept, because this conference is one of my first feathers, if you want to call it, that I stuck on the ground here, was that this is our future, and we better start understanding how it affects our future. How do we as leaders prepare for our future? So,
Thank you.
challenges. Let me flip the slide here. I already talked about that. The gas tax is what we call completely unsustainable for what our long-term needs are going to be. And quite frankly, we're going to have to find a way to fund transportation. This isn't the department stance. This is very strictly a Paul Steinman stance. But I do believe that user-based funding is where it's most likely going to go. If you use it, then you're going to pay for it. It's just like we do almost everything else in our life. If you want to go on an airplane ride, basically you pay for that ticket, and that's you're using it. So I see that more and more being how we get there. Now the question is, what mechanisms are we going to use? How are we going to keep the whole concept of Big Brother from watching you and all that type of stuff out of that process? And it's definitely something that we're going to have to continue to work with to make that happen. There's basically, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, there's going to be changes in land use patterns and modeling. One of the big concepts, if you talk to a lot of the millennials, is, quite frankly, I don't want to own a car. I just want to be able to get on my cell phone and hit Uber and have it show up, and then I get to use it, and then when I'm done with it, it goes away. Well, if that is how the future holds, just think of things simple as parking ramps. That's going to change how a city models itself. If you truly have autonomous vehicles that they can follow closer because they don't get distracted. You don't need as wide of shoulders. There's all kinds of design changes. Quite frankly, if we go to more of a home-based work concept like my son seems to think the world is going to, the use of the systems are going to completely change. All these type of things are going to change how we view the world, and these are the type of things that just looking backwards doesn't work anymore. These are things that we all have to start thinking about as leaders in the transportation industry. There's other concerns out there, such as all this computer-based stuff, and this is something my dad always brings up. Well, you guys can just hack into anything anyway. So he goes, you think I'm using that thing? I'm not going to trust that thing's going to get me there in one piece. Not surprising from a fellow that refuses to buy a computer. So, but that type of perception and those type of issues are real issues. People's perception of trusting that we have this correct and it's going to work properly is definitely an issue. But on the same token, he's got a solid point. Hackers can get into anything, and how do we make a system that has redundancies so that we make sure that vehicles don't start crashing because someone started playing with the system? And then there's even simple things that you probably don't even think about, insurance coverage. If a computer is driving the car, who's insuring what? I mean, there's the business side of this world too that we need to start thinking about. These are all things that we hope to bring out at this conference and get people thinking about how do we go there and what does that look like. So these are all issues that are out there and challenges that we're going to have to try to overcome. I can't stress the concept of the change in how roads are funded. MAP 21, which is the current federal legislation, expires September 30th of 2014. If Congress doesn't do something, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, you just need to understand how the numbers play out. Currently, there's $38 billion nationally that we spend on transportation. The federal gas tax generates about $27 billion. There's $11 to $12 billion deficit that the general fund picks up. And quite frankly, if Congress doesn't act, what's happening is we've borrowed. We actually didn't even pull it out of the general fund. We borrowed from future revenue as a country. And so basically it's another $15 million that has to come off the $27 million in the future, starting basically October 1 of 2014, which from Florida's perspective, I'm here to tell you that we got to give our legislators a lot of credit. Globally, I'm not, depending on what program you want to talk about, but only about 25% of our funding comes from federal gas tax. The rest of it's all state funded. Florida can take a hit on our federal side. Sure, projects would be delayed, but we can take a hit and still be moving our system forward. I'm here to tell you there's a lot of states across this country, and I've worked in 2 other DOTs, that they're upwards of 70 to 80% federal funded. And if you take that type of hit in those states, they have serious issues. And they aren't the only ones. And I'll bet you of our 50 states, I bet you about 25 to 30 states are over the 50% mark on federal funds. So those are real issues. And we actually have state issues when it comes to funding as well. A few years back, $200 million of the gas tax revenue was diverted to help balance our budget. The department very openly has been trying to get that money back into the Highway Trust Fund. We have a number of legislators out there right now that want to reduce the tag and title fees, and if they reduce them at the rate they're talking about, that $200 million goes away. So not only does it not help the general fund, it's not there for transportation as well. So we have our own challenges within the state, but I will tell you that we are in far better shape than most states. I will also tell you that our system is in far better shape than most states. So I'll brag a little bit here. Our bridges are #1 in the country. And that has a lot to do with the way our legislation is written, that if a bridge becomes structurally deficient, the department has 5 years to do something about it. And it's not asked. We're required. That's the first thing that comes off the top is addressing structurally deficient bridges. Our roadway system consistently for the last 10 years is anywhere between 1 and 5. Either #1 or somewhere in that range. So we do very well as a state when it comes to our transportation system and what it looks like. So that's a lot to be proud of. I guess I'll just leave you with my final thought as the new guy in the room. When I start talking transportation with people, I say, what do you want transportation to look like? And they usually get, well, Denver does this, Charlotte does this. Everybody wants to be like somebody else, and I keep wondering, why do we want to be like somebody else? Why don't we want to be Tampa? And why don't we figure out what Tampa wants to be?
Everybody's looking at Mark. Gee, I'm doing that.
Did I steal your thunder? I'm sorry. I guess I didn't realize you said that.
He can ask a question now.
The other way.
Oh, well,
But
I just
roll, so go right ahead.
I just always wonder why that is, because I guess I'm the type of person that my grandpa always told me, you don't want to be somebody else. You want to be who you are, and you want to be the best you can be at it. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Well, thank you very much for that. Open to questions and follow up on his line there. What does Hillsborough need to do best is that? Commissioner Beckner.
What is,
Who's
you
your
mentioned
mic?
that we rely at about
Mike.
20.
Kevin.
Mike, please.
Sorry, thank you. We rely about 25% on federal gas tax dollars.
Yes.
What is the, can you break down the remainder of what
Well,
the
it's
sources of
some
funding?
form of state funding. I guess I don't have our total funding picture memorized. Between we do gas tax, we do dock fees for developments. We have special assessments on rental cars, airline tickets. There's a lot of different ways the money comes in for transportation. So, I just think that's something that most people don't realize how good Florida has it from the standpoint of the fact that the way we've set ourselves up as a state, that we don't rely as heavily on the federal funds as a lot of states do, and that actually plays a very large role in why our system looks the way it does, because we're more self-reliant than a lot of states.
When do you start becoming concerned? What amount of money or the percentage taken away from us on the gas tax do you start becoming concerned about the revenue streams on the federal level?
Well, every dime that we don't get's a concern to me, because we still have more needs today than we have dollars. I mean, when we start to look at, I have no way of, we don't have in the funding program, I'll word it this way, right as it sits today, we don't have 118th or the Gateway Project over in Pinellas. We don't have the Howard Franklin. We don't have the State Route 60, 275. And these are just Tampa jobs. I'm not even talking about anywhere else in the state. I don't have any of the managed lanes projects basically in the cost feasible program right now. I was joking with Secretary Prasad when I first walked in. My second month in, he says, give me an assessment of where we're at. And I says, well, all right. I says, on top of my normal program for Tampa, I says, give me $5 billion and I go away. And he just kind of looked at me and laughed and said, yeah, you're pretty funny, kid. That's not happening. So these are things that we have to compete for. And that when I go to Tallahassee and say I'm going to Tallahassee, I'm competing every time I go up there for how I can get dollars from we as district secretaries in a very friendly manner. I mean, when I say competition, I don't want to say that we're out punching each other out or anything crazy, but we compete for dollars. We got to show that the projects that we're putting on the table have a rate of return. It's going to be the best for the state. It's driving the economy forward. Those are all the things that we sit and talk about. So it's probably a little different than you've seen in the past. I know that, for example, TIA about fell off their chair when they came to me with their master plan and said, these are the dollars that we would like the state to participate in. And I looked at them and said, okay, show me your rate of return on those dollars. And they looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, well, this is kind of looking like a little bit like a business investment. What's the rate of return? How do I know the dollars that I'm going to be giving you the taxpayer dollars that we're responsible for are going to provide us a positive rate of return. And I'm just not throwing it into a hole and it's going to disappear and not produce what people expect it to produce.
Commissioner Christ?
I want to follow up on that point. You said rate of return and on the federal dollars. Unless things have drastically changed in the last 3 years, that 25% that we get from the federal government is significantly less than what we send to the federal government. That in fact, Florida tends to be a donor state, and we're actually building roads in other states. Isn't that true?
Florida is a donor state, but I will tell you that it's no different than us sitting here today and talking about the fact that we need to find ways to work together to drive the economy forward. If Tampa Bay is successful, the state of Florida will be successful. If the state of Florida is successful, we're all successful. As a country, you got to be able to get stuff off the West Coast. I was just talking about how the fact a lot of what we consume comes in Long Beach and gets railed and trucked all across the United States. If we didn't have New Mexico and stuff, if we didn't help New Mexico have those roads in play so that that truck could get here, that would have a negative impact on our economy.
Follow up, please.
I agree, but I guess the point I was trying to elevate is the fact there are some out in the audience or watching today that have a negative feeling towards the state or local governments going after or maintaining federal support, when in essence these are dollars that are generated right here on our own streets in our own state that are going to Washington, and all we're basically trying to do is bring our fair share of what we've sent up there back home to be invested here. Because the more we invest here, the more we're able to send there, so the more we're able to help others.
Don't disagree that if we can increase our percentage that we receive back, that's always a good thing. But I don't want everyone to always view that to be a complete negative, because as I was saying earlier, 60% of what we receive in this state, goods that we receive in this state, come from someplace else into the state. And if those states don't have the population base to support those roadways, and those goods can't get here efficiently and effectively, then all our prices go up because it's a supply-demand situation. If the supply is reduced and the demand is still there, we get charged more. It's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. What is the right number? I think we could debate that probably 5 or 6 meetings in a row and still never get the right answer. But it is a concern, and we try to do our best as the DOT to get, when the reauthorization at the federal level happens, we definitely do our best to try to get as much back as we can.
One of the principles this group is working with is about financial sustainability. You talked about user fees. You see that as more and more the future for transportation?
I personally do. People are going to be more interested in the concept that if you use it, that you're paying for what you're using. It's far more palatable all the way around. I don't think you're ever going to see some form of a gas tax or something like that ever completely go away. Again, even if you just look at, let's just look at Hillsborough County globally. You have South County areas that have a lot of needs, and there's no denying that the largest population base is right here in the Tampa area. Some of those dollars that are produced here probably help South County, but that doesn't mean that they're any less part of the county than anything else or anybody else. I mean, we have the same issue in the department with our 5-county area that I serve, Citrus County up there. I mean, we always take a look at, are we trying to be relatively equitable with the dollars that we're distributing? But there are times that in order to have that smooth connection on 75, that, yeah, we're going to be putting some of the money that Hillsborough and Pinellas produce up maybe in Hernando County on 75 to ensure that you can get to your Gator game or wherever you're going, because otherwise, you know, just the dollars generated there wouldn't be enough to support what we're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Chris?
You know, unless I missed, I didn't hear anything mentioned about T-BARTA and what role it may be playing in the future. From your perspective, what do you see T-BARTA's role being in the near and further future here?
Well, planning is no matter what funds you're talking about, whether it be federal, state, having a solid plan is important, and having a group that can help us get there. We have the MPOs, we have T-BARTA. T-BARTA is also doing a lot with on the mobility side with respect to mass transit, van pools and all those type of things. I see that role continuing, one, and two, it could possibly expand as we look at this whole regional concept. Sometimes you need a person that the department can't drive it locally. The federal legislation doesn't allow me to look at you folks and say, this is what you're going to do. Make my life a lot easier some days, but that's not how the process works. So we need a local voice that has more than a one county view sometimes, and I think T-BARTA can play that role. We just need to work together to structure what that looks like.
Have you heard any rumblings over the last 24 months about the possibilities of maybe legislative leadership in Pasco looking at better connectivity to Tampa? When you were looking at your drawings, we saw that there were at least two routes that were going north, that if they kept going further north, let's say up to the Economic Development District in Pasco, which is 54, they would eventually connect. There's going to be a lot of legislative muscle for the next 8 years coming out of Pasco County, and they're going to have their hands on basically the purse strings. It seems to me that it would make sense for them to want to connect their Economic Development District to the economic hub, which is Tampa. Have you heard or participated in or are aware of anything moving possibly in that direction?
Well, first say that I've only been here about 7-8 months, so I can't speak to anything before that because I wasn't here, obviously. But with respect to what's going on up in Pasco, we're widening 75 to 3 lanes all the way up to the Turnpike connection, and that's really more to help facilitate some better system reliability. I mean, it's no secret that 275, I-475 in that area gets pretty jammed up. So we definitely want to try to facilitate a better traffic flow from that direction, and that's definitely going to help Pasco. But has anyone specifically talked to me about sitting down with Pasco and making all these different connections? Not yet, but on the same token, in this coming month, I'm going to be spending a little bit more time up in Pasco too. So you may just be a month ahead of me, just trying to get out into all the different communities. And I spent a little time up in Citrus and Hernando. They have some ideas of what they would like. Pasco's next on my list to get there.
Mayor Buckhorn?
Secretary, I don't want to put you on the spot, and certainly you can't necessarily speak for the administration, but help us understand, is there any overarching policy from the governor's administration as it relates to rail? I mean, is it considered to be part of the multimodal package? Are there certain benchmarks that we're going to be expected to, the ROI that you've asked of the airport, which is a perfectly legitimate request? Are there certain things that we at the local level will be expected to achieve in order for FDOT assistance or FDOT participation in a proposed rail project?
There's nothing I would say that, you say the administration, I take all my direction from our secretary. Whether he's getting something, I'm not going to try to even comment there because I have no idea what discussions he's having with the governor's office. Are we looking as a department to make sure that we're being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar and that there's going to be some, that we can ensure that this isn't going to be something that we're just going to be constantly putting money into to try to sustain? Obviously, we want to know that it's well thought out, that there's going to be some form of, in this particular case, ridership that's going to generate the type of revenues to help make this project successful. When you talk about any type of light rail project, for example, this is definitely something that you're seeing as part of our Howard Franklin bridge study. The bridge just for rail that people want us to build to cross the bay, it's $1 billion, billion with a B. And that has nothing to do with what it costs to replace the existing structure. That's just for the rail structure. The standards for rail structures are far more stringent than you would say that they are for like a vehicular structure. It's just a huge chunk of money, and we just want to know that any money we invest in the community And I don't care if you're talking about buses for Hart, whether you're talking about TIA, whether you're talking about rail, that there is definite a solid plan, and that you have the community support from the standpoint of either ridership or whatever it is that you're building, that it's going to help make that system successful. No, I didn't probably answer the question the way you wanted me to, but I really have no better answer for you at this moment in time on rail.
No, I mean, and I recognize your position. It's just, as we go through this process, it would be helpful to us if we knew what was expected of us and what those benchmarks were that we would be expected to meet if we look at rail as an option or BRT as an option. I mean, because we would hate to go down this road and come up with a plan and all of a sudden, not have FDOT participation or not have state of Florida support because we were then asked to meet a set of standards that we didn't even know we were. So, we all lived through the high-speed rail situation, and most of us still struggle with how that decision was arrived at. But it would be nice to know as we look at our options, what's expected of us. I mean, is it ridership numbers? Are there certain thresholds that we have to meet? We just don't know, and so.
And I would say the department's always happy to sit down and continue this conversation. And I can definitely go, I'm in Tallahassee enough, I can make sure that I understand exactly what the secretary is going to be asking of me and make sure that you guys have as much information as I have it when I have it.
So from a process perspective, as this group starts to move toward items such as the mayor's talked about, we can engage you
Certainly.
in a dialogue about how you react to what's being proposed. Commissioner Merman?
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Buckhorn, for those comments, because I do think it is important. You have to be a partner with us. I mean, we can't move forward without you because of the funding issues. So my question is this, because I've heard loud and clear from you and several people in your department that we need to be very clear what our priorities are and united as a region. Two questions. In your opinion, what do you think is the best group to assemble that priority list? And the second is, what do you think our top two priorities are?
Well, the group, I think we're making good strides with, we've brought 3 MPOs together. We're meeting quarterly with them to talk about what are the regional priorities and truly hammering out what that looks like. So from the group perspective, and T-BART is part of that process. When I say the MPOs, but T-BART is in there as well. I think that group is really the group, that's what we view as the group that needs to come together to develop those priorities. And we need to be speaking with one voice for the area. Because if you chat with any of the, especially when you're going after federal dollars, which are getting tighter by the day, if we come at them with different priorities, those legislators lose interest real fast. In conversations that I've heard with Mr. Micah, he'll flat out tell you that is that, hey, you guys need to have one voice, and we need to be very clear what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Now, what do I think the priorities are? From a department perspective, of course, I'm going to be very, very selfish. I'm looking at what to build that backbone. I mean, I think that the managed lanes are the first piece of the big puzzle. But before you can even get there, we've got a few projects that we've got to get done. Howard Franklin, that State Route 6275 Memorial connection. Those are 2 primary projects in Hillsborough County that have to happen before managed lanes can even get off the ground. And I say that because right now we're working on 275. Even if I don't get the managed lanes up and running immediately, we're working on 275 and using my old construction days, we're widening the pipe on 275, we're widening the pipe on the veterans up there right now. If we make the Howard Franklin bigger, I've widened the pipes in all the areas, and where it connects, the pipes stay the same size. It doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out that you got yourself a problem if you don't address those. So as I go to Tallahassee right now, if you want to know what I'm fighting for, those are some of the projects right now that I'm fighting for in Hillsborough County. Obviously, I have some other ones in some other counties that I'm working on too that are important to those counties, but from a Hillsborough perspective, those are probably our 2 biggest projects right now that we've got to solve before a lot of these other things can happen.
And if I can just have follow-up, if that is your top two priorities, and we can help you as a body here, or individual commissions or elected officials, to advocate with our electeds in Tallahassee, then please let us know, because we'll do that. I mean, if that's what it is, and we have opportunity this year to get funding for that, I think we also need to speak loud and clear from our seats to tell them.
Certainly appreciate that, and I guess I've gone public a number of times and said that those are, from a Hillsborough County perspective, those are the two big jobs that we've got to solve. Because you can't do all this other stuff we're talking about. I don't care if it's rail, I don't care if it's managed lanes, pick a project. Nothing happens until those two pieces are fixed. It just, that's the bottleneck right now. Nothing happens until those two projects roll. I realize they're about $400 million each. Those aren't cheap projects.
Vice Mayor Lott?
One of the things we're tasked with here is getting facts, okay? And we're getting lots of facts from a lot of different resources and so forth. And today you gave us 2 facts that I didn't know, you know? And, you know, could you take whatever resources you have that shows that our bridges are #1 in the country, our roadways are 1 to 5, and the other facts, and is there a way you could make that available to us so that we can have the same set of facts that you're looking at? So like when Mayor Buckhorn's talking about us being on the same page, we know that when we think maybe we have the roast roadways, but then this report says we're #3, at least we're speaking the same language. So if you can make that available to us, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly. Those are just newspaper articles of different groups that assess system condition, and I can certainly get you those.
Appreciate it.
You know, you just touched on something that has occurred to me over and over in our meetings, and that is facts. There's a lot of facts being stated, and not yours, Secretary, but there's been a lot of facts stated in here, and I just wondered where they bubbled up from. Someone a couple of weeks ago made a statement that we have the worst traffic congestion in the country. Well, the Texas Transportation Institute had a nationally recognized study of regional congestion, and Tampa Bay region was listed as having the 25th worst level. So I wonder how this group made the determination that we went from 25th in 2011 to 1st in 2013. There's just so many facts floating around that simply aren't so. I think that perhaps your group is working on some kind of a basic fact sheet, are they not? Herb?
Yes, let me just share that quickly, and we'll be presenting it to you in the next meeting, as, you know, some basic data points comparing Hillsborough County to other competing communities, others that y'all have mentioned, we'll look at. So we'll be bringing that forth to you, and you know, I'm sure that'll generate questions on another version. But we do want to provide, you know, a basic fact base that we'll have references for, and you know.
I think it would help everybody. Another fact that was stated here, and I was really stunned by it. One speaker said that in Hillsborough County, our ridership is predominantly choice, not necessity. Well, that's totally incorrect. We haven't done an onboard study recently. We are getting ready to do one, but it probably is a very small percentage of people that ride the buses in this community by choice. Most of them, that's how they get to work and conduct their daily lives. It's necessity, not choice. So it'll be very helpful to have a set of facts that we can all move forward and talk about options that are really facts.
And we would certainly invite you, if there's a particular data point you'd like us to research, if you'll let Eric know, we'll make sure we try to do that.
Good.
And, you know, we'll have what we'll have for the next meeting, and then we'll build upon it. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate
thank
it
you for
very
having me.
much.
Hopefully it was what you were looking for.
Was. Let me remind everybody, our next meeting is November 13th. We had a very good public meeting earlier this week at Sickles, around 30 people, but many of them were new to the process, so it was a very good discussion. I'd like to thank the managers who were there to participate in that. So, thank y'all. See you next month.
Got out of school early.